Harper. Oh. And he is a water resource control engineer for the Small Community Drinking Water Technical Assistance and Administrators Unit. And we have Emma Blankenship, who is also a water resource control engineer, and she works with the Small Community Technical Assistance Unit. And Kyle, if you are ready, I will hand it off to you to begin our presentation today.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tina. Are you going to share the screen, Emma? Okay.
Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be talking about project scoping and consolidation and regionalization outreach. We just have some quick meeting logistics for how to use Zoom. We can just leave that up for a second or so. Okay. So here's the brief outline of today's agenda. Me and Emma will be talking about project scoping, and then later Caitlin will be talking about drinking water consolidation and regionalization. And then Danya and Laura will be talking about wastewater consolidation and regionalization. So me and Emma's presentation today is focusing on project scoping. Tina already did introduction, so we can just jump straight in. So today we'll be focusing on project scoping with a focus on planning projects. Planning is when a TA provider completes all planning and design tasks necessary to prepare a water system to implement a construction project. In this training, we will be going over AR assignment, project kickoff calls, identification of work plan tasks. We will also go over some example work plans, some items to flag, and some additional considerations TA providers should make. So first, we will briefly touch on the AR assignment process. So below is a quick overview of the technical assistant assignment process. So usually a TA request form is submitted. That is the first step. And usually for consolidation TA requests, we would like to see a letter of intent from both entities involved in the proposed consolidation along with the TA request form. And then another item we would also like submitted with the initial TA request is a map of the system along with the TA request form. And next, DFA staff usually reviews the TA request. Usually we will follow up with either the system, the division of drinking water if it's a drinking water request, or the regional boards if it's a wastewater request. And the next step is the actual TA assignment. So normally we assign emails to TA providers over email. I will go over the actual email more in depth in the next slide, but we have a pretty standard email format we send for assignment emails. But a big, I guess, an important step in this procedure is that the TA provider has to respond to the email and either accept or deny the TA request. And I also just want to point out that this is going to be like a pretty broad overview of the TA assignment process. This is because we have previously held a more in-depth training on a TA program overview. I've included a link to the overview in the this slide. We also have more links in the final slide of this presentation as well. You can use one of those links to find all our previous trainings. Now, then jumping back to step number 3, we wanted to go over the TA assignment email a little bit. This is the actual email template. I just first wanted to point out the contacts. The first contact for the TA provider email, for this TA assignment email is the TA provider contact. This is like the actual person that will actually accept or deny the request. Now the CC list is a bit longer. This typically includes the DFA TA seniors, the DFA TA grant manager for that specific TA provider, and the system or community contacts. And then the next few contacts vary depending if the TA request is drinking water or wastewater. If it's a drinking water request, we typically include either the division of drinking water district engineer or the LPA if the system is monitored by the LPA. We also include the Division of Drinking Water Engagement Unit staff as well on this email. And then for wastewater TA projects, we just include the regional board contact. And then jumping to the body of the email. The body of the email is pretty standard. We state the name of the system. We provide an AR number. We also mention the technical assistance provider name. And then if that provider has multiple agreements with us, we also state which agreement this specific request is being assigned to. I also just want to point out that the TA provider name and which agreement we are assigning this request to is also stated in the email subject line. We also point out the system contact name and include a brief summary of the scope of work. Then at the bottom of the email, we also usually include the TA grant manager's name and email address. And then I also just want to point out, I guess going back a little, talk about just attachments real quick too. Normally in the assignment email, we normally attach the original TA request form we get when the TA request is first submitted. And then we also attach some additional contact information too. And then after the email is sent out, the TA provider can either accept or deny this request, but we would like that to happen over email as well. Okay, and then after a TA is assigned, the next important step is a kickoff call. So it is the expectation of DFA that every full planning project will have a kickoff call, because the purpose of a kickoff call is to get the TA provider, the system, and all the water board staff all on the same page, for gathering info on the water system and discussing the scope of the project. I also just want to point out it is expected for full planning projects to hold monthly project meetings. This can change though, depending on how the project is progressing. But the initial requirement, I guess, on our end is we would like initially the projects to be scheduled for monthly meetings. And then if everything is progressing smoothly, then we can taper off those meetings to less frequent intervals. And then I guess to jump a bit more into kickoff calls, who to invite to kickoff calls. This list is actually pretty similar to the list of people that the assignment email goes out to. I'll just go over it again. The following contacts should be invited to the kickoff call: the TA project manager, the TA project manager senior, all the water system contacts, and all the community representatives. And then specifically for drinking water projects, the DDW district office should also be included in the call. And if the system is regulated by the LPA, we should also include the LPA contact in the call as well. We would also like the Safer Engagement Unit staff in the call too. And then for wastewater projects, we would also just like the regional board to be included in the call. And on this slide, I've included a map that shows all the appropriate regional board staff and their contact information. We also have included the same map at the end of the presentation as well. So going back to best practices, the purpose of the kickoff call is to get everyone on the same page. That's why we would like the proposed project timelines to be discussed in the kickoff call. And I guess a crucial step to the kickoff call that goes even before the meeting happens is we would like a meeting agenda prepared and sent out ahead of the kickoff call. And some items to mention on the agenda would be introductions, confirming the system information and proposed technical assistance scope of work, and then again discussing the proposed project timeline. We would also like ahead of time for a meeting facilitator to be identified as well. And then also someone to record and send out meeting minutes during the meeting as well. Again, sending out meeting minutes after the meeting is a crucial step too. And then we will jump to the specific task involved in full planning drinking water and full planning wastewater projects. But first, I guess I'll just define full planning project real quick. Full planning projects are projects that include all planning and design tasks necessary to prepare a water system to implement a construction project. Some of these tasks do vary depending on if the project is a drinking water or wastewater project, but we will touch on that in a little bit. Also, just for reference, a drinking water project would need to complete a drinking water SOF or DWSOF application package, while a wastewater project would need to complete a clean water SOF or CWSOF application package. Now we have also included some tasks below that are typically included in full planning work plans. I will just briefly touch on the drinking water SRF construction application required tasks, which are the engineering report, plans and specs, environmental documents, financial documents, consolidation agreements if the project is a consolidation consolidation project. And we also need the actual funding application forms as well. And now we can jump into each of those a little bit more in depth. So the first item we'll jump into is the engineering report. For specifics on the engineering report, you should refer to the SRF application instructions and engineering report guidance document. And we have included both drinking water SRF and clean water SRF instructions on the link in the last slide of the presentation. Now then, for plans and specs, sorry, give me 1 second. For plans and specs, so the completion of plans and specs actually varies depending on if the project is a drinking water or a wastewater project. For drinking water projects, we would ideally like to see 90% plans and specs completed. However, we will also accept draft level plans and specs, which is 60%. So we need to see at least 60% plans and specs for drinking water projects. But if possible, we would prefer to see 90%. Also, one key thing to point out too is if the project is involving Division of State Architects or DSA, we would need to see plans and specs completed to 100%. And then for wastewater projects, we actually only need to see plans and specs completed to the level necessary to conclude environmental review, which is actually only 30%. So just a quick summary. For drinking water projects, we need 60% plans and specs completed, and for wastewater projects, we only need 30% plans and specs completed. And next we'll jump to environmental documents. For environmental documents, typically for full planning projects that go through TA, they qualify for Tier 2 secret only environmental review. And a key difference to point out with wastewater projects is that wastewater projects actually require 2 additional environmental tests that drinking water projects do not. These tests are the biological resources assessment and cultural resources report. Later in the presentation, we will go over example drinking water and wastewater work plans, and I'll point these out again. Also, for environmental documents, it's important to keep in mind that they should typically be completed by an environmental consultant or dedicated staff with qualifications and experience to prepare environmental documents. Also, if there's no other public agency involved in the project, please notify the project manager who will reach out to the environmental review unit or ERU for the CEQA lead identification. And I guess I just want to point out too, we're just briefly going over environmental documents, but we will actually be holding another training in the future that will just be focusing on environmental documents. So I guess just keep that in mind too. That in jumping to the next task, that would actually be TMF assessments. So we actually included in this slide a link to the necessary TMF forms, but the actual form varies depending on the system. For non-transient, non-community systems or community water systems that service less than 10,000 people, standard TMF assessment form is required. But for systems that have more than 10,000 people, please submit an alternative TMF assessment form. And for consolidation projects, we just need a TMF assessment form for the receiving water system. And then for financial documents, SRF applicants are required to submit audited financials or tax returns for the 3 most recent fiscal years at the time of the application. Also, reduced financial credit review is required for some consolidation projects. And in a consolidation, financial documents are only needed from the receiving water system, who would also be the SRF applicant. And touching some more on some consolidation tasks. Consolidation agreements must follow guidelines for consolidation agreements linked here, and draft and final consolidation agreements must be submitted to DFA for the Office of Chief Counsel or OCC to review. And typically for consolidation projects, some form of outreach will be required. This is due to consolidation projects requiring buy-in from the community. For outreach, it is just important for the TA provider to identify outreach methodology and/or deliverables this can also be discussed in the kickoff call or monthly project meetings for full planning projects as well. And I will briefly touch on some additional tasks that may pop up for full planning projects. I guess the most important aspect for land acquisition and easements is that this should be started as soon as possible due to this task being known to cause project delays. And just to highlight how this can cause delays, just want to point out we have seen projects get delayed due to Caltrans review taking a long time. We have also seen delays caused from just obtaining easements from individual homeowners taking a while, since this task can require a significant amount of outreach. So the biggest thing to keep in mind with easements is just start this task as soon as possible. It is also not uncommon to see some permitting related tasks pop up as well. We include some examples here. Then jumping to one of the most important components of full planning projects is actually submitting the SRF application forms. Typically, the general package should be submitted first. And not only should this be submitted first, this should be submitted as soon as possible. This is because when a general package is submitted, DFA will assign a construction PM to the project. Now, DFA may assign a PM into certain projects even before the general package is submitted, since the construction PM's input is variable early on. However, the only way to completely ensure that a DFA PM is assigned is to submit the general package. So we would recommend submitting the general package as soon as possible to get that DFA construction PM assigned. And I guess on the other side, the financial package should be submitted last. The financial package should be submitted last so that financial documents do not become stale once the application is completed. We will be going over specific work plan examples, and we will also point out the general package, financial package, deliverable due dates. Now then, we will start going over some work plan examples.
Yeah, so I'll go over this first work plan. This is just, your pretty generic standard work plan that you might see for a drinking water consolidation. This specific work plan is Kenmar Gardens. It's an RCAC work plan under their SAFER agreement. And it's a full planning project to consolidate Kenmar Gardens, which is a mobile home park, with Oceano CSD. I'm pretty sure a lot of people on this call have seen the typical format of a work plan, but I'll just go over it quickly. So this top section here basically just has some water system information and contact information and the title of the work plan. A lot of this information can be pulled from the TA request. If it's a drinking water project, you can also pull this information from SIDWIS. Or you could get it from annual reports, other sources as well, and you can just confirm all that information at the kickoff call. And then the next section is just a description of all the relevant water systems involved. So here is a little description of Kenmar Gardens. Also, if it's a consolidation project, it is also helpful to describe the anticipated receiving water system in the consolidation project. So probably would have also been helpful to get some more information on Oceano CSD in this work plan. Next section is just on compliance issues. So we'll want to know of any compliance orders or enforcement actions, violations, what have you. We'd also want this section to highlight any contaminants of concern. And it's also helpful to put the maximum contaminant level and compare that to some of the sample results that have been seen at the water system so that we can see just how high their level of contamination is. Next is just a map of the water systems. This is particularly helpful on consolidation projects so that we can see the location of these water systems in relation to one another. So on this work plan, it's helpful to see that Kenmar Gardens is already in the service area of Oceano CSD. So that makes the consolidation a little bit easier. Next is the need for technical assistance. So basically just describing the scope of the work that the TA provider is doing. So for full planning, they'll be preparing the DWSRF construction application, and that'll include the engineering report, plans and specs, application packages, and the alternatives analysis is going to look at a few different options, namely consolidation with Oceano. And then for the tasks in this deliverables table, just a couple of things to note with these first two tasks. If your project's going to involve surveying or some other type of protected job classification, then you should make sure that you budget for labor compliance in the work plan. Also, if the project's going to involve any changes in like service area boundaries or like a consolidation project, it's also helpful to include LAFCO in the project and in the work plan as well. Just a quick note on task 3. I think that's specific to RCAC, so you might not see that in other TA providers' work plans. Corrective action plan. That's an optional task for full planning projects, but in this case, it's just something that we added in here. It might be helpful to a water system if they have a compliance order. Also, the general package in this work plan, they have that task submitted first, as we said, so that we can get a PM assigned ASAP. And then the PER and the engineer who's working on that should refer to those application instructions that we mentioned previously. Also, I just want to make a quick note that the DFA work plan review is expected to take about 8 weeks. So when you're laying out this schedule and all these due dates, you should keep that in mind when you're putting this together. Next is the plans and specs, and on this one, we're going to 90%. And then we have all of these application packages, so technical, environmental, and financial. For the environmental package, we might need to loop in the environmental review unit. So once it's time for that, you can just reach out to your project manager to make that connection. And then the financial package is submitted last. And the details like the project title must match the general package. And also just to note, since that general package is submitted first, there might be certain details like the budget and the scope of the project that might need to be updated later on, and that's fine, that's okay. You can just update that and submit it again, but still important to submit that as soon as possible. Also want to note that this particular work plan was submitted to DFA June 2022. So if you look at these dates in the second to last column, we're in July of 2023 when we expect all those application packages to be submitted. So this is about a year out from the start of this work plan. Last couple tasks. So we have community outreach, which is often helpful in a consolidation project. And post-application support, which is basically where the TA providers finished the application and submitted it, and they're kind of on standby just to help address any questions or concerns that the construction project manager may have when they're reviewing the application and putting together a funding agreement for the construction project. And then last here we have the budget table. So I think this is a pretty representative of a typical planning budget we might see. And I also want to note that we include a 10% contingency budget on all of our full planning projects.
Okay, and now jumping to the next example, this is a wastewater capital improvement project. Jumping to the first page of the work plan, you'll notice the actual format is pretty similar, even though this is a wastewater work plan. The biggest difference is probably in that first line where it points out that this project is wastewater, and another big difference is for wastewater projects, there would be no public water system ID number. And you could also pull the actual system information from CRIGS. Going through the work plan, the actual technical assistance details section is very similar to the drinking water work plan example. And then going to the next page, the need for technical assistance section. This again just briefly goes over why TA is required. So this work plan also has a section called LTA providers. This is required if multiple TA providers are helping the same community. That way we can coordinate project meetings between the two TA providers. Now jumping to the deliverable table. I would like to just point out deliverable number 3, the CWSF general package. Notice how, again, the general package is submitted first. This again is crucial so that construction PM gets assigned as early as possible. And then after that, we mentioned to prepare an engineering report. And then after that, we jump to plans and specs. And again, notice how this is only 30% plans and specs. Since again, this is a wastewater project and 30% is all that is necessary to clear an environmental review. Then I also made sure to point out deliverables 7 and 8, prepare biological resources assessment and prepare cultural resources report. These two deliverables are additional CWSF application requirements. So again, these won't be found on drinking water projects, but this is still necessary for completing all the CWSF application requirements. And then after that, we jump to SEQA documentation, then the environmental package. Then going to the next page. Notice how the financial package, again, is the last package submitted. This again is important to make sure that the financial documents do not go stale. And then we have a general task for project management. And the very last task is just provide post-application support. This is just in case any items require follow-up during the drafting and execution process of the CWSF application. And then again, I also included a budget table just to point out that since, again, this is a full planning project, we can include 10% contingency budget on this. And that is it for the wastewater work plan example. It is pretty similar to the drinking water example we gave, but we just want to point out the key differences between the two. Next, we'll be jumping to the TA full planning timeline.
Yeah, so here I've laid out kind of your typical timeline that you might see for a full planning project. I'm presenting this flowchart linearly, but I just want to note that a lot of these tasks are going to be happening in parallel. And of course, the timeline is going to be different for each project. And, you know, this is kind of an ideal timeline, assuming nothing goes wrong and leads to any significant delays. You know, realistically, you may or may not be able to achieve the timeline that we've presented here. So first, we start off by assigning the AR, and then the TA provider has a week to accept it. First contact with the system should happen 1 week after the TA provider accepts that AR. And then it might take 2 weeks to schedule a kickoff call based on everybody's availability. The work plan should be submitted for private TA providers within 8 weeks of accepting that AR. And for nonprofit TA providers, the work plan should be submitted within 10 weeks of accepting that AR. DFA approval of the work plan is going to take 8 weeks, and you should be holding monthly meetings throughout the course of the project. General package might take 3 months after that work plan's approved. And then we have the preliminary engineering report, which might take 6 months after the general package is submitted. After that comes plans and specs, and then we'd see the technical package submitted. And then the SEQA documents for a drinking water project. As we mentioned before, if it's a clean water project, then those federal crosscutters are going to be required. So you might need some additional time to do those biologic and cultural reports. Then we have the environmental package and the financial package. And lastly, we'd allow maybe 9 months for that post-application support while the application is being reviewed and finalized. And so overall, typical planning project timeline might be around 2.5 years from the date that it's assigned to the date that the application is completed and the agreement is being finalized. Also, I wanted to go over some items that you might want to flag with your TA project manager if any of them pop up in one of your projects. So first is if it's a project involving a school, it will likely require review from the Division of State Architects or DSA. They require that an architect or professional structural engineer be in responsible charge of the plans and specs. And they may require that those plans and specs be developed to a 100% level before they review. And their review often adds time to the project schedule, so you might want to keep that in mind. Also, if you have a project for a Native American tribe or involving tribal land, there's a new legal requirement that's in place starting January of 2023. If you want to refer to the bill language, it's AB 2977. And it requires us to have a tribal liaison on any meetings or phone calls with tribes for drinking water projects. And our tribal liaison is Elizabeth Herrera. We have added her email here. So if you have a meeting that you want to schedule with the tribe, then you can email her or notify the project manager and the PM can make that connection. And also another important thing to note for if a Native American tribe is the applicant, then they will need to sign a waiver of immunity to sue, which basically allows the State Water Board to enforce the terms of our funding agreement. And since this is often a sticking point with the Native American tribes, it's best to let them know about this requirement as early as possible, possibly even at the kickoff call. Just so they're not surprised by it later on in the project. Also, we want to point out documentation of ownership and water rights are requirements for the SRF application. So they must submit the ownership documents for their water system and a description of their water rights. If there's any issues with these documents, then we might not be able to fund the project. Just to provide an example, without naming the water system, we had a project with a water system that was serving a school and they received water from a non-potable source and they weren't able to provide sufficient water rights documentation. This system also had other TMF issues going on, but right now their AR and their construction application have been on hold for about a year. And right now we don't have a clear path forward for funding them. So it's led to significant delays and we may not be able to fund the project at this time. Also, test wells are an important point that we want to go over. So when you have a test well that's being funded through planning or technical assistance, the test well would usually be drilled, tested, and then destroyed. And an environmental consultant is going to have to determine if that test well falls under a CEQA exemption. The only exception to this process is if the project is in a hard rock area, then we may allow the test well to be cased and capped and then converted to a production well later on under the construction project. But this will lead to some additional upfront requirements. So a capped test well is going to require environmental documents for the entire construction project. And that those must be completed and filed before the test well drilling begins. Also, there's federal requirements such as Davis-Bacon, American Iron and Steel, and Build America, Buy America. If a project doesn't follow these requirements prior to test well drilling, then it won't be eligible for any federal funding. They'll only be eligible for state funds. Right now, we do have enough state funding to fund these projects that include test wells, but that might not be the case in future years. So definitely flag it with your PM and determine if you should be following those federal requirements. Otherwise, funding for the construction project may be jeopardized. Also, if your project involves any construction that's going to happen on private property and any infrastructure that will not be owned and operated by the applicant long-term, then this construction on private property is going to be subject to an ability to pay analysis. And that ability to pay analysis, basically DFA is going to look at the financial documents of the private property owner and basically determine if they can afford to pay for those improvements that's happening on their property. For example, we see this often with private laterals on a consolidation project where a water system is connecting to a domestic well community that wasn't previously served by a public water system. For consolidation in category A through C projects, which are basically projects addressing serious public health issues, we may be able to actually waive that ability to pay analysis if one of the following conditions apply. So if the owner has no other commercial assets, or if it's a consolidation project, we can also waive that if the subsumed water system is CPUC regulated, or if the necessary improvements are not likely to increase the value of the property. And we are developing some procedures for how to determine if a project can waive this ability to pay analysis. So that will be coming at some point, and then we can provide more information on these waivers. Just a couple last few considerations that you might want to pay attention to. So in a consolidation project, the applicant would usually be the receiving water system that's going to be surviving at the end of the consolidation. If the receiving water system cannot or will not be the applicant, then you might need to discuss this with the project manager to see if another entity like the subsuming water system could possibly be the applicant. Also, if a water system is a public entity, then they would typically be the CEQA lead. Otherwise, the CEQA lead agency should be the agency with the greatest level of responsibility, for example, a local regulator. Also, the State Water Board can act as the CEQA lead in some cases if there are no other public agencies involved in the project. But in order to initiate that, you'll need to get written approval from the environmental review unit before identifying the state as the lead. A couple last budgeting considerations. Like I mentioned before, labor compliance should be included in the work plan. If you have any surveying or other protected job classifications, that will need to be added as a consultant on the planning project. Also, you might want to consider adding fees for environmental filing, permitting, plan checks, etc. If those aren't covered in the construction agreement. And here we have some links as well. So for drinking water and clean water SRF, we have the application forms and instructions linked here. We also have the intended use plan for both programs as well. That's updated annually, so we'll probably get a new IUP in July of 2023. And we also have our SRF policies here. We have a link for SIDWIS if you're looking for information on a water system, as well as SWRCB, which will give you any information on a wastewater facility. We also have links to the maps for the regional board contacts and the safer engagement unit contacts. And lastly, just a link to our technical assistance webpage, which you can go there if you want to access any previous trainings that we've done. You just have to navigate to the information for TA providers tab and scroll down to trainings. And that is all that we have. So any questions on the materials we went over?
We do have a question in chat. It says, you mentioned when a project involves a school, it's likely requires DSA review and requires architect and structural engineer on the plans. Is that it? If that is that if it involves a school or a school building or a school property? Does a water pipeline through a school backfill require an architect?
I believe that requirement is if it's affecting a school building, then DSA needs to be involved. I don't know all of the requirements for DSA though, so you might want to look into that a little bit further. I just wanted to note that so that everyone was aware.
It looks like Daisy's responding to school property.
Hmm.
Looks like Katie, Ruby, you have a question? You can go ahead and unmute. Maybe not.
Looks like it might be glitching.
Yeah,
Looks
it's
like
not letting.
You may have to just write in chat, Katie.
Yeah, it's not letting me unmute you, Katie.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
For the work plan, current and past compliance issues, how far back would you like us to go?
I don't
I
think
mean,
we
if
have- yeah,
if there's
go
like
ahead.
a compliance order, we would probably just like to see that mentioned at least. The
Yeah, if it's been resolved and compliance has been achieved again, then we probably don't need to see that compliance order. But if there's a current compliance order, we definitely want to see that. And maybe any violations related to the project within the last few years would be helpful information.
and again, this could be like discussed in the project kickoff call, since the project kickoff call should probably discuss any like necessary system background information. And then if it's brought up and DFA staff thinks it's appropriate to include in the work plan, we could just make sure it's included in the work plan as well.
Thank you.
Katie, were you able to write your question? Get to your question? Oh, okay. Can we reach out to the TA recipient prior to accepting, declining an AR to gather more information, better understand what the scope might entail for the kickoff call? And number 2, can you clarify the roles for the kickoff call? Roles are led by DFA versus TA provider? So there's 2 questions there.
I think for the first point, I think you could reach out to the feel free to jump in if you want to, Emma. I think you could reach out to the system prior to accepting the AR, since that assignment email has all the contact information for the system in it.
I would just add to that, maybe it would be best to first reach out to the DFA grant manager who's identified, because they might have all the background information on that request if you're still not sure if you want to accept.
Yeah, and just I guess jumping to that second question for the kickoff call, I guess the major roles to clarify would just be, again, like I mentioned, who's going to facilitate, who's going to record the meeting minutes. I guess another key one is who's going to actually like set up the meeting and the invitees to. Normally it's a TA provider, but again, that should probably be clarified as well.
Just
I
to
guess,
help you out there, Kyle, usually the TA provider is the
yeah.
one who does the kickoff meeting, and they are the ones who facilitate the meeting and send out the invites and do the meeting notes and send those out afterwards. That's how typically our kickoff meetings go. If that's what you mean. Okay, thank you. Zoe, do you have a question?
Yeah, just thanks. I just wanted to chime in on that a little bit. Yes, I think you're correct. So usually our expectations are that the TA providers would be reaching out to the stakeholders and setting up that meeting with everyone. And then in terms of the DFA grant manager, we would be participating on that meeting, providing feedback on the scope, what can be funded under TA, and then also if there's any other funding questions related to the project. And then just going back to your first question a bit, on accepting and declining that AR. So it is a new process we're trying out because before we haven't really officially established a period of time for TA provider to accept an AR. I do agree with Emma. I think it may be better to reach back out to the DFA staff who send out that AR first, to get more information on that AR if you have any questions. I don't think there's a specific issue with reaching out to the TA recipient, other than that, if you're still evaluating that assistance request, then we probably just want them to be clear on that as well, so that they're not confused with which TA provider is working with them. Since some of these water systems that are submitting the request may not be familiar with the TA process.
Thank you, Zoe. Are there any more questions? And Daisy, thank you for helping answer questions in chat. Okay, so if we are good with the questions, if there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and move forward. Thank you, Kyle and Emma, you did a great job. Now we'll move on to our drinking water consolidation and regionalization portion of the training today. Caitlin Juarez will be presenting, and she is a water resource control engineer with the Division of Drinking Water. And let's see, Caitlin, I'm going to go ahead and head it over to you if you're ready.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
We can, thank you.
Awesome. Hi, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Caitlin Juarez and I work for the Division of Drinking Water in our Southern Engagement Unit. And I'm located in our Fresno office, so right in the heart of the Central Valley. So here is my brief agenda. I'm gonna pack in a little bit of information about a lot of different topics. I know folks on the phone today, some I've been working with for years and have tons of experience with consolidation, and some of you may be newer. So I'm gonna do my best to make sure that we're all on the same playing field. So I'm going to start with covering what consolidation is and why consolidation may be a good option for a small water system. Next, I want to talk about roles for technical assistance providers and what they may assist in a consolidation project. Then I'll move to the state board's mandatory consolidation authority and how that has evolved over the years. And lastly, I will talk about some consolidation incentives that are available through DFA. So to kick us off, I'd like to briefly go over some terms. Many of you may be familiar, but in case you aren't, consolidation is joining of two public water systems, state smalls, or private residences not served by a water system into a single system. And regionalization would be bringing together multiple water systems, so more than two water systems to form a single system. So that might be two small water systems and one large water system that is involved, or it could be 5 small water systems all connecting to the same large water system. A subsumed system is a water system, state, small, or private residence that is actually going to connect to a larger water system or a receiving water system. So you can think of a subsumed system as a small water system that's going to be absorbed by a large water system. And at the end of the project, it will no longer exist. So a receiving water system is the water system that is going to provide water service to the small system through consolidation or extension of service. So you can think of the receiving system as a large water system, such as a city. So why should water systems consider consolidation? Um, you guys are all technical assistance providers, and you know better than anyone that small water systems really face a range of issues, including keeping up with regulatory requirements, inadequate staffing, and poor governance. You know, some may or may not have boards to make decisions on behalf of the community. Many of these small water systems lack infrastructure improvements, and their systems are nearing their useful life. Unfortunately, they just don't have the economies of scale to, set rates that are covering the true cost of running that water system. And if there is an emergency, if a pump goes out and there's only 15 homes, the cost per home is really unaffordable. So not all small water systems have these problems, but a lot of them do. So how do we make sure that water systems have access to safe and affordable drinking water? One of the most reliable ways to ensure this is through consolidation. So large water systems tend to have technical, managerial, and financial capacity, which we also refer to as TMF. Um, they often have source redundancy. These large water systems are not relying on a single groundwater well. They often have storage and the ability to access funding, whether that's through the Division of Financial Assistance or through their own rate base. And again, they just have a larger economy of scale so that those costs can be shared among more people. So these are just a few reasons why a small water system may benefit from consolidation. So consolidation or water partnership doesn't have to always be a physical connection. So I'm just going to briefly touch on a few types of partnership and consolidation so we can all be on the same page. So local resource sharing can be either a formal or informal agreement between water systems that allows them to decrease their costs. So an example of this type of partnership, we could have 3 nearby small water systems that all may need billing services, they need operators, and they need specialized equipment. So instead of each of these water systems paying a part-time operator or a manager to help with these functions, the water systems can work together to jointly contract these services out, and hopefully they would get a reduced rate or a more specialized staff while they still maintain their local identity. So they're not connected, but they can partner together to hopefully see some reduced costs. Another example of this is that they could all agree to manage and buy some type of expensive equipment that they need, and they could take turns sharing that equipment. And so this is just an example of local resource sharing that can help water systems save money. So they have their other funds to pay for their needed improvements, keep some funding in their reserves, and pay down any existing debts. So managerial consolidation is another type of partnership. And that is when a small water system becomes part of a larger water system for all managerial purposes, but continues to use their original water supply and distribution system. So for example, a small community may once have had a all volunteer staff. That volunteer staff may be aging and no longer wants to be responsible for the water system. The water system may be too far away from the large water system to make it cost effective to physically consolidate. The larger water system can legally take over the water system's functions, such as regulatory reporting, billing, operations, but still use the small water system's existing infrastructure. So in a managerial consolidation, that smaller water system's governance would dissolve and they would no longer be legally responsible for providing water service to those customers. So what does physical consolidation look like? This picture shows a water system on the left connecting to a nearby city for water service. Each water system service connection or home has an individual water meter and is a direct customer of the city. This means that at the end of the consolidation, the small or subsumed water system will dissolve. This example is often referred to as a full consolidation. So an example of a full consolidation we have right here, this happened in 2020, and this is Beverly Grand Mutual Water Company. Beverly Grand is a small disadvantaged community water system in Tulare County. They served a population of 92 people off a single groundwater well. Beverly Grand was issued a compliance order for nitrate in 2004. Luckily, as an interim solution, the residents were receiving bottled water through Tulare County's bottled water program. And in 2019, the mutual received Prop 84 funding to complete a planning project. And then they eventually got construction funding through Assembly Bill 72 to complete that consolidation with the city of Porterville. So this project consisted of a new water main and water services, fire hydrant installation, well abandonment, and water system dissolution. So today, the 28 service connections at Beverly Grand are currently receiving water from the city of Porterville, and the technical assistance provider that was involved in that project is Self-Help Enterprises. Consolidation can also occur via master meter or a wholesale relationship. So this picture shows a water system on the left that is connected to a nearby city for water service. The water system is served by the city through a single master meter. Now, I'm not sure if you can see my, maybe you can see it, my mouse, but I try to note this as a single master meter versus over here, we had multiple meters. So those were direct connections. This is a single master meter. This means that the water system receives a single bill, and it's up to the water system to determine how that is paid to the city. Master meter consolidations are really common for mobile home parks, apartments, schools, and churches. And in those cases, the water systems actually dissolve at the end of the project. And this is typically because there's a single owner or a private owner, and there are no pass-through costs for the water service. So an example of a master meter consolidation project is the George Cox Water System, which George Cox Water System is located in Reedley. And they served about 40 people, and it had 10 homes. And they were all owned by a single person, and they relied on a groundwater well that was drilled in 1960. There were pressure issues that the community was experiencing, and they were also out of compliance for DBCP. The long-term solution for George Cox was to consolidate with the city of Reedley through a water purchase agreement. Self-Help Enterprises was the TA provider on this, and they were assigned in 2016 to complete planning work under their TA contract. The construction application was submitted in January of 2018. And I should note that Self-Help contracted some of the engineering work out to Provis and Pritchard, who's also on the line. So it was really a joint effort there. Although changes in funding, the funding source caused some delays for this project, it did receive funding in January of 2021 for roughly $400,000. The construction project included a 4-inch diameter water service intertie and backflow preventer that you can see in this picture. Once the city made connection to George Cox, the George Cox water system disconnected from their well. And as of March of 2022, they have been receiving all of their water through this master meter service connection. So as we just saw in those two examples, but there are so many more, technical assistance providers are a huge asset to water systems. Some of the tasks that TA providers might assist with in these types of projects include an income survey or an MHI survey that oftentimes census data is not representative of a community, and a third party may come in to conduct a survey to determine what the true income is. So I know I've worked with many of you on income surveys in the past. Another important task is a feasibility study or an alternatives analysis to look at options for these water systems and what they may be able to do to fix their compliance issues. TA providers also may assist in application submittal, whether that is for planning or construction, complete full planning under their TA contracts, work with the communities and complete outreach and public meetings, as well as assist with claims and reimbursements and project closeout. So I wanted to briefly touch on the feasibility study and alternatives analysis and what we at the Division of Drinking Water are really looking for during this analysis. We want to start with a problem description. You know, why does this water system need funding? Why does it need technical assistance? What support are they looking for? So do they have a water quality or quantity issue? We also want to describe the water system as it currently stands. What sources are they using? Do they have any treatment or storage? What is the condition of the distribution system? Do we even know what the distribution system looks like? And here's where we want to talk about any other deficiencies within the system. As far as alternatives, although there could be many, you know, we definitely want to see that consolidation is looked at. And we want to look at community water systems within a 3-mile radius. We may consider drilling a new well or a new source. And we also want to look at installing treatment. When we look at treatment, we want to see, you know, what contaminants are in the area, what is the age of the well, because oftentimes these systems, their infrastructure is past its useful life, and so installing treatment is more of a band-aid and not a long-term solution. So we're really looking for a long-term cost effectiveness, and we think we should be looking at a 20-year period. And so when we're looking at the capital cost, the operation and maintenance, and what the water rates are, we really want to make sure that the solution we pursue is affordable for these residents. And you may be thinking, you know, why is this long-term cost effectiveness important? But for example, treatment could have a lower capital cost, but a higher O&M. And so oftentimes funding is available for capital costs, but it may not be available for long-term O&M. So the state board has the authority to order or force consolidation under certain conditions. And there have been several bills that have been passed over the years that have really evolved this authority. And so Senate Bill 88 was the first bill that was passed back in 2015. Then there was Senate Bill 552 and Assembly Bill 2501. So my slide really just shows a summary of all of those bills. So if you have questions after, I'm happy to go into those in depth and let you know what the changes are in those separate bills. But for today's purpose, I just have this summary slide because this is what is applicable now. And so who is eligible for mandatory consolidation? And that is community water systems, K through 12 public schools, and private domestic wells. What is the income threshold for mandatory consolidation? And they have to be less than 80% of the statewide median household income. And that's the term we use for disadvantaged, right? And right now, that number is just about $63,000 for that household. And then lastly, does the water system have to be out of compliance? And there must be a documented water quality issue or a documented water quantity issue, or the water system must be deemed at risk. So that bottom one, it can be or, either of those three options, a water quality issue, quantity issue, or at risk. So if I were you, I may be saying, what is an at-risk system? Or how do I find out if a system is at risk, if they would be eligible for mandatory consolidation? And so the California Drinking Water Needs Assessment comes out every year. And this is the definition from the needs assessment that at-risk public water system means community water systems with 3,300 connections or less. So that's a small water system, and K through 12 schools that are at risk of failing to meet one or more of the key human right to water goals. So that is 1, providing safe drinking water, 2, accessible drinking water, 3, affordable drinking water, or 4, maintaining a sustainable water system. So in order to find out if the system is actually at risk, we'll have to reference that needs assessment to make sure that they're included. And so the 2022 needs assessment identifies roughly 400 public water systems that are considered at risk of failing to provide a sufficient amount of safe and affordable drinking water. I want to briefly highlight some of the major milestones for this mandatory consolidation process. The Division of Drinking Water encourages voluntary consolidation wherever possible. However, if parties cannot come to an agreement to consolidate in a timely manner, mandatory consolidation may be implemented. And the first step in this process is to officially notify the water system that would be consolidated. So the subsumed system and the larger water system. So we'll notify both the subsumed and receiving systems that they have 6 months to negotiate consolidation voluntarily, and then to report back to the state board at the end of that 6-month period. And during that 6 months, the state board will hold a public meeting and invite all affected residents and try to explain what the current issues are in the system, why consolidation is a good option, and get their input as well. If the systems have not come to an agreement at that end of the 6 months, we'll go ahead and hold a second public meeting. So that second public meeting will be 6 months after the first meeting. So if a mandatory consolidation order is issued, the state board is required to make specific findings in that order. And some of those findings are that the subsume system has failed to provide an adequate supply of safe drinking water. Reasonable efforts to negotiate consolidation have been made. We want to make sure that there are no pending LAFCO actions or water rights issues, and that consolidation is economically feasible and cost effective. So these are the major milestones that have to occur in order for the state to issue a mandatory consolidation order. And it should just be noted that this could take a year or longer. You know, the fast track is really 1 year to get all of this done. So, and that's just before the order is issued. And so that's why we really encourage voluntary consolidation. And if we have to, you know, this is kind of our last resort. Okay, so consolidation incentives. This is the fun stuff, right? When we're trying to negotiate with the receiving systems or a city or a larger entity, you know, they oftentimes ask, well, we're interested in consolidation, but what is in it for me? And so the Division of Financial Assistance does offer incentives for those receiving systems. And that is a construction project that solely benefits a receiving water system. So a public water system that fully consolidates one or more communities with at least 15 service connections is eligible for up to $10 million of 0% financing for that incentive project. And now there's also grant and principal forgiveness funding available, and you can see those amounts there. So up to $10 million per service connection for small, severely disadvantaged communities. And they all have a maximum of $5 million for those grants. And this is for full consolidation, so a physical consolidation. Just want to make note of that. But DFA also offers consolidation incentives for managerial consolidation, which this is fairly new and exciting. And that is up to $2 million of 0% financing or loan, and then up to $5,000 of grant funding per connection if they managerially consolidate a small, severely disadvantaged community. And that is a maximum of $1 million per year, or per system, excuse me. So I know I just gave a bunch of information about a lot of different topics, and you may have questions, which I will be here to answer any questions that you have today. But if you think of questions later, we have a Northern Engagement Unit and a Southern Engagement Unit, which are, you know, people in these areas that are covering these areas for consolidation and water partnership projects that you will be able to reach out to. And with that, I will open it up for any questions.
It looks like we have several questions
Oh.
and comments. Let's see. Is George Cox still considered a community water system, or did it dissolve?
Yeah, so George Cox Water System, it actually dissolved. And that's what I know I didn't do the best job covering it, but it is privately owned. So there was a single owner there. And so the water rates are actually included as part of the rent. So there are no pass-through costs for the water. So George Cox is no longer a public water system.
Great. And then the next question is, where can we find definitions for those 4 qualifications that make a system at risk? Had trouble finding them in the intended use plan.
Yeah, let me go ahead. I can't see the questions when I'm I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing because I can send the link in the chat, but I can't do it while I'm sharing. Okay. I'll drop a link to the needs assessment in the chat right now.
Okay.
Just while Caitlin is doing that, so the intended use plan is what we typically refer to for funding in terms of how we intend to use either the drinking water or the clean water funding for that specific fiscal year. The classifications that Caitlin is referring to was the at-risk water systems. So that's part of the needs assessment that the Division of Drinking Water use. So I know Caitlin just provided the link to that needs assessment.
Right. Thank you, Zoe. It looks like somebody left in the chat. I believe you mean 10K, and I think you were referring to slide 23, but I don't know to what context that is referring to. If you want to ask your question, MB. If not, I can jump to the next question. Are consolidation incentives only available for voluntary consolidation projects or for mandatory consolidations as well?
I believe that consolidation incentives are only available for voluntary consolidation projects, but if somebody in DFA wants to hop in on that question, I know it's included in the intended use plan.
Hi,
So
Caitlin. This is James. Yeah, that's correct. The intended use plan does specify that consolidation incentive will not be available to receiving water systems completed a mandatory consolidation. But it does caveat that the Deputy Director of DFA does have the ability to approve on a case-by-case basis an exception for that. But in general, the consolidation incentive is for voluntary consolidations.
And that exception is also more for cases where the receiving water system is willing to take on the smaller water system, but the smaller system is not willing to consolidate, since that incentive is meant more for the receiving water system.
And I just want to add, the reason that we did it that way is that so that we can better encourage people to consolidate while while being just voluntarily, so that we just don't want people to get to trying to discourage them from going into mandatory consolidation, which costs us time and money, right?
Thank you, Dat. Okay, we can go to the next question. You mentioned consideration of consolidation with systems within 3 miles. The 2014 TMF instructions list 5 miles. Has that changed?
So I'm not sure about the TMF documents specifically, but yes, we are now considering just 3 miles, and it's the same for Senate Bill 1263, which is any new proposed public water system has to look at consolidation before they receive a permit from the Division of Drinking Water. And the reason for that is solely the cost. The cost per service connection. I mean, it's just really high. We're estimating through our funding, it's about $1 million a mile. So it could be up to $5 million. 3 miles is still pretty far, but we are seeing some connections made at 3 miles, but I'll have to look into the actual TMF document. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, this is that. So in the past, before all the cost inflation and things like that, we put 5 miles there. So the general rule of thumb was anything that is less than 5 miles should be considered reasonably, seriously looking at as a consolidation. That is the option. So I think as things progress, that we see the 3 miles is more or less of what the projects, beyond that, it's not, it's exceed the service connection limit not grant that we allow. So, but I just want to point it out, this is a mandatory TMF element that consolidation need to be looked at seriously for all small water system that is coming to us for funding. So so if the system does not want to consolidate, and it is the selected alternative is consolidation, then DFA will not be funding that projects. That is not consolidation with our grant.
Thanks, Dat. All right, the next question is the George Cox Consolidation Project on the SWRCB website? Have the documents for the project been made public so that we can view them for a project that is very similar?
Yeah, they're not on the website yet, but I did write a success story that will be posted soon. And then Jessie Snyder said, go ahead and talk to Eva because that was her project.
Perfect. Next is, can you talk a bit about what happens in a mandatory consolidation situation when the small failing system is in agreement, but the potential receiving water system is not?
Yeah, so this is common. We have a few active consolidation projects right now where the large water system is maybe the party that does not want to move forward with the project. I mean, all of the steps and the tasks are the same. We hold these public meetings. We try to offer funding and technical assistance support and incentives, before we issue that order to try to sweeten the deal with the large water systems. Unfortunately, if they don't, then we can take enforcement action, for missing deadlines. But we do our best to really work with both systems because our main goal is to, get those small systems compliant water. And I did send a link right now in the chat to our mandatory consolidation website. So you can see those active mandatory consolidation projects that I'm talking about. And it will show like the process. And then there's also a tab that systems that started the mandatory consolidation process. They got that 6-month letter, maybe a first public meeting was held, but then now they have decided to move forward voluntarily. So it never actually got to that mandatory consolidation order point.
Thank you, Caitlin. Are there any more questions? You could raise your hand or drop them in the chat. No? Okay, well, I think we're ready for a break. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll meet back here at 2:35 and we'll proceed with the next portion of our training.
As my role as part of the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board is to facilitate community connections to public sewer services to protect water quality through an incentivized path that could benefit, of course, not only the disadvantaged communities, but also the wastewater treatment facilities in need of upgrades to meet compliance with their permit requirements. Because throughout this process, we have found out that that was one of the first roadblocks in the process, trying to convince the potential sewer service providers to actually start working towards wastewater consolidation. So, and the State Water Board selected the Central Valley Water Board as the pilot region to implement Senate Bill 1215 because of the large number of disadvantaged communities in the Central Valley. So we have the greater number of projects and a little bit more experience since all the other regions started a little bit behind in the process. So I was looking through the chat earlier on, and I recognize a lot of the names of some of the technical assistance providers that I have been working with for the last 3 years since this program has been in place. And so I know that they are very familiar with some of the information that I will be presenting today. And because we coordinate and work together very closely in these projects. So today I would like to describe how to scope wastewater consolidation projects. And it's slightly different than what Caitlin presented for the drinking water side, because our resources are very, very different for wastewater consolidation projects, and I will go in a little more detail into that. So the approach, it's different as well. So how to select and prioritize wastewater projects, what information is available, where to start, and as I described in the previous slide, how to motivate and incentivize a stakeholder, especially the potential sewer service providers. And I will go through a couple of example projects. So the first item is how to scope wastewater consolidation projects. So I'm going to go through the Senate Bill goals, Senate Bill 1215 goals. I think that will provide a good understanding of what projects qualify for funding and what is the funding and Senate Bill 1215 criteria, and what are the resources in terms of the staff available to you to proceed with that. So as I was saying, this program is fairly new. We have been in place for like 3 years roughly. And the main goal of the program is to reduce nitrate impacts to drinking water by, as I was saying earlier, providing an incentivized path for sewer service connections. So as well as the State Water Resources Control Board, authority was given to the regional boards to administrate this program and also to make sure that disadvantaged communities served by inadequate on-site sewage treatment systems are connected to sewer services. So knowing what regions have been allocated staff resources to implement Senate Bill 1215 is very helpful information, because it means that you as a technical assistance provider, you can coordinate your efforts and with regional board staff, and it could also mean better if the project will move a little more efficient and is better use of resources, and ultimately that translates into a faster transition towards the construction application phase. So unfortunately, not all the regions were given resources, but here is the ones that are, which is regions 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we have a total of 8 staff throughout the state to implement Senate Bill 1215 or wastewater consolidation. So that's one of the big difference in terms of staff. I mean, 8 versus roughly 80 staff for drinking water consolidations. So, and here I put the link of where this map with the contact information for each one of the staff lives, which is in the Central Valley website. And of course, staff contact information is subject to change due to the hiring process and people moving to other programs and so forth. So within the future, you can, if you want the most updated contact information, you can go to this link provided here. So in terms of determining which communities qualify for as a wastewater consolidation project, the legislature within Senate Bill 1215 specified 3 main criteria. And this is very similar to the criteria that DFA has for funding as well. So the first one is the definition of the community has to have or depend 100% on an inadequate on-site sewage treatment system. And that definition is actually defined in the water code. So, and this is the definition. And here I'm listing some examples of what constitute on-site sewage treatment system, such as septic tanks, cesspools, leach fields, seepage fields. We deal primarily in Region 5 with septic tanks. But Region 6, Region 4, Los Angeles region, they deal a lot with cesspools. So it just depends on where you are. So the second criteria listed in Senate Bill 1215 is the communities, they have to be classified as disadvantaged communities according to their median household income. And so this is also a definition within the water code. So it's very clearly defined. And so this is very important because it determines the possibility or likelihood of getting 100% grant funding if they are disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged communities. So now, as Kayla was mentioning in her presentation, there is circumstances where a community is not classified as a disadvantaged community because it falls within a census block group that is, it has perhaps a higher median household income, but that not necessarily means that that median household income is representative of that particular subset of or that community that you are interested in connecting to sewer services. And that's why that's not to be discouraged. If you have information that that median household income is misrepresented, you can also initiate the median household income survey process. And this is just a flow diagram that I put together for one of my projects. And because I find that as the technical assistance providers start to work with the communities, it's very confusing for them, the overall process and what to expect throughout the different steps. So it helps a lot if they could really, especially for the community that is representing the entire community, the representative, if they understand the process clearly and what are the steps, they can be kind of an ambassador with the community and make your job a lot easier by going and talking to the neighbors. And so the neighbors are on board with the process. So the last criteria for Senate Bill 1215 is the distance from the community to the nearest, in this case, I have wastewater treatment facility, but it's actually the nearest sewer connection point. And within the legislature, that distance is listed as 3 miles, but this is mainly applicable to mandatory consolidations. So if there is a voluntary consolidation going and it so happened that the distance is a little bit greater than 3 miles, as long as within the maximum allowable funding that the FAA has as part of their requirement, the project still is likely to be approved. So here is Region 5 current approach for the wastewater consolidation process. And so we emphasize a lot this step, the first step, which is the relevant stakeholder negotiation process, which includes all the outreach, education and outreach to the community, to the potential sewer service providers. And we put a lot of emphasis in this part of the process because, as I mentioned earlier, the resources allocated for wastewater consolidation are very different than for drinking water consolidation. There are 8 staff, 2 within my region, and but we cover a vast region all the way from Redding to Kern County. So for us, it's very important to provide all the necessary information during this step so we can reach consensus from the community and the potential sewer service providers without having to, in a voluntary basis, without having to pursue a mandatory consolidation, which is going to be using, as that and everybody else was mentioning earlier, is going to use a lot of resources that not only we don't have in terms of attorney and staff resources, but also it's going to draw the very little limited resources that we have, and working with projects that are moving in a voluntary approach and they need our time and attention. And but also it's going to consume a lot of resources from the community side and from the sewer service providers, because they usually end up hiring attorneys and everything to review all the documents within the mandatory consolidation process. So we have found that emphasis in the relevant stakeholder negotiation process and providing as much information as we can, it has helped tremendously to continue with the and with the successful approach of the voluntary process. And these are just some of the findings that they need to be made if we were to proceed with the mandatory consolidation. So the second step is how to select and prioritize wastewater projects. So I will go through a couple of prioritization approach examples from Region 5, the region where I work, and Region 4, which is Los Angeles region. So within Region 5, we are very fortunate that since our region already have a couple of programs in place, such as the on-site wastewater treatment systems policy, CVSALs, and the nitrate control program in place. So within the nitrate control program, for example, they have already identified 6 priority counties that are part of the management plan zones. And so, and all of those priority counties are these red ones here in this map in the left side. So those are kind of the priority counties for the nitrate control program, and those are our priority counties as well for the wastewater consolidation program based on those fundings. So the second step is within that, we narrow it down to a community level, and applying Senate Bill 1215 and the small community grant funding criteria, we can narrow it down more to a community level. So to determine which ones of those communities are unsewered, we coordinate and work very closely with county health departments, because they have all of that information, since they have to implement the on-site wastewater treatment systems policy. So we also, our ranking is based on the nitrate impacts to public drinking water, and also consolidation interest is very important, because as I said earlier, if we have consensus from the community and the potential sewer service providers, that means the project will move more efficiently towards construction, as opposed to a project that there is a little hesitation and or other political aspects to consider that might slow down more the process. So, and given the limited amount of resources, that's part of our consideration as well. And then, of course, the criteria for the small community grant. And finally, we just select communities that meet all that criteria. And so this is an example of, we are using the 3 mile radius criteria defined in the legislature. And so this is this is the city of Modesto water quality control facility. And so we are looking what communities that meet the disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged criteria are within that 3 mile radius. So we have communities, and the yellow dots are mobile home parks that also qualify for funding. This is Region 4 approach, Los Angeles region, and it's a similar, very similar criteria to Region 5. These are all the considerations that they take in terms of Senate Bill 1215, the funding criteria. How do they look for unserved communities? What database or programs are they looking for that kind of information? And then they go into more detailed ranking systems to evaluate which communities are going to be prioritized. And these are also the data sources or where they are going to obtain that information. So for where that information is found, and I'm going to go through all the criteria that we use and the data sources for that meet that criteria. So in terms of Senate Bill 1215, as I was saying, where do we find communities that meet the 3 mile radius? That could be found in CWIX. That's the database that contains all the national pollution discharge elimination systems or waste discharge requirements permits. And Laurel Wardridge, she's going to go in a lot of detail on how, what are the more important steps to go and look for that information and some of the challenges as well, because as you know, no database is perfect. So, but she's going to cover all of that for you since it is a public database available to everyone. So the second part is the disadvantaged community status that is always available within the latest American Community Survey database, and also the California Housing Community Department also has some information regarding to that. Actually, housing and community development, that's what that stands for. And the third criteria that SB 1215 require and the sources for that inadequate on-site wastewater treatment systems can be found in, as I was saying earlier, with the county health departments, and also you can request to the city for sewer service maps, and the counties might have that information as well. And then the prioritization and the ranking of which communities are going to be evaluated first. It will depend on the nitrate impacts to public drinking water sources based on, in our case, for Region 5, we have the nitrate control program. And of course, the on-site wastewater treatment system, the existing conditions, and consolidation interest. So for the small community grant funding criteria, sources of where you can find that information, it's once again the 2020 American Community Survey database, and impact to public drinking water sources. SAFER has a lot of information in their databases of how to find that information, and also the nitrate control program within Region 5 that has a lot of valuable information of what communities are affected regarding nitrate concentrations. And the other factor is the cost. And currently, all of these projects, regionalization and wastewater consolidation, are available to a maximum allowable funding of $125,000 per eligible household connection. And regarding the distance to, of course, the distance to the wastewater treatment facilities, that's going to determine the cost of the project. It's going to be tremendous influence on that. So that information for regards to where that wastewater treatment facility is located, and potential information on their boundary regarding the network connection, sewer service network connection, can be found in the MPDS and WDR permits that Laurel is going to show through the navigation of the SWRCB database. And also with the recent sanitary sewer systems general order that was adopted in December 22 of last year, it has a requirement for maps, boundary map for sewer service connections, and all the geospatial data that comes along with that. So, but unfortunately, that information, that requirement is going to be in place on July of 2025, meaning that's when they need all wastewater treatment facilities, they need to submit that information. So for now, we are limited to whatever is available within the counties or cities website or MPDS and WDR permits. So connections, of course, the American Community Survey database has all that information for most of the communities, how the number of connections that they have, as well as their current disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged classification. So in terms of how to determine the technical, managerial, and financial aspects of specifically the sewer service provider side, that information once again can be found in the WDR and MPDS permits. And so some of the aspects that we evaluate closely with these projects is the current capacity, their compliance status, because if they are these sewer service providers are not able to comply with their current permits, and they are having a lot of violations, and they have a lot of wastewater treatment upgrades that they have to do to comply with their permit, it's going to be very difficult for them to take on another, the provision of sewer services to another community if they are having a tough time managing their own compliance of their own existing facility. So that's why all of this information is very valuable at the beginning of the process, to know what is the status of the potential sewer service providers. So ideal information needed for the process within these permits is, are the permits going to come for the renewal very closely, along with how are the timelines with the renewals and the wastewater consolidation project, because that's a good opportunity for getting the most updated information with these facilities. And so compliance status for all these domestic wastewater treatment facilities is very important. And once again, can be found within these permits. So if the information is not available, what to do? And the reason why the information might not be available in CWICS is because, once again, staff resources are very limited. There is about 450 permits or more within just Region 5 alone for just waste discharge requirements. So a lot of the information is not uploaded into CWICS in a timely manner. So that's why, once again, it's very important for you to be able to contact regional board staff. That's kind of the most efficient way to obtain the information that pertinent to that particular project. So next is where to start for wastewater consolidations and regionalization projects. And so the process starts with in making the contact to the respective regional board staff. Sometimes these projects are referred to us by technical assistance provider, by the community, or by permitting staff if they are specifically if they are struggling to if they are working with a facility that cannot meet compliance with their permit and they are providing sewer services to a small, severely disadvantaged community, and that will be referred to us for as a regionalization project too. So if the project was not referred by a technical assistance provider, regional board, we start usually with the preliminary outreach to the community and the sewer service providers, which in this particular case, there is like 4 potential sewer service providers. So we can start kind of gathering a little bit more information about the willingness of the sewer service providers, especially to move forward with the project. And also their feasibility, is it really feasible? And they can kind of get a pretty good idea according to the distance, the sewer rates, and all of that, if it's going to be feasible, not just for them, but for the community, in this case here in red, Monterey Park Tract. So then we keep moving forward with the process, as you are very familiar with, to collaborate in the outreach process and working with the engineering consultants and all of that, until finally we regional board, we transfer the project to DFA, and so that's where we end up the process. So this is very important, how to motivate or incentivize stakeholders. The communities are usually very much on board with the process. They have a lot of concerns and questions when it comes to the funding aspects, but the ones that are a little more difficult to work with are the sewer service providers. So that's what I'm covering here. So as I was explaining, the communities are usually on board with all the process because there is tremendous benefits to them, and you as technical assistance providers, you are very much aware of what these benefits are. But for sewer service providers, they have also some benefits, and I don't mention benefits are incentives because that's another difference with the drinking water consolidation aspects. We don't have incentives per se for sewer service provider, but there are some benefits that in the sense, if they are struggling to meet compliance with their current permits and the requirements, perhaps some of the grant funding could be could help them complete some of those necessary wastewater treatment upgrades so they can provide sewer services to the community. So that's why it's very important, and I am not going to go into details on the next few slides because I believe there was a training done with the technical assistance provider, your role and everything. But I just wanted to show this as an example of, this is part of what I use in my presentations, because I worked for the first 1.5 or 2 years without technical assistance providers for the most part, other than the preliminary outreach, maybe income surveys and things like that. But now that you have been, your scope of work has been increased tremendously, and you can help communities and these projects with full planning, is just a tremendous opportunity. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of making sure when you are communicating and presenting information to sewer service providers or communities, everything that you do to make the projects move more efficiently, faster, and all the activities is kind of really important to emphasize that. And it's a tremendous advantage that it needs to be definitely mentioned throughout the stakeholder negotiation process, especially the time saving, because you are now able, if a technical assistance provider is assigned to a project, the technical assistance and the planning phase could be combined into one. And and everybody familiar with these types of projects, you know that the planning phase could take easily 2.5 years or more by the time that you are done with all the preparation of all the planning and engineering design components, and the FA is reviewed and completed all that information, and to the point of having a funding executable agreement. So it's just having technical assistance providers is really an amazing advantage and a benefit that needs to be emphasized during these projects. So, and this is just a flow diagram that I put together for the process, and I use it a lot throughout my presentations with the communities to help them understand the process, the time frames, and all of that, which Emma and she covered a little bit throughout the initial presentation. So the funding aspect, this is also, as I was saying earlier, we don't have incentives per se for sewer service providers. So, but I found that it's very important to present the numbers in terms of what funding is available for these projects. And giving that information and the most updated information according to the most recent intended use plan is very, very important, and clarifies a lot of questions and concerns and that communities or the sewer service providers may have. And finally, I have a couple of example projects that I wanted to go through. So this is a regionalization example project, and I know Kaylin went through a series of definitions for what the drinking water program uses. I have been instructed to use regionalization in a slightly different way, meaning in this case, Shady Lakes Mobile Home Park is they have their own wastewater treatment plant in place. It's, as you can see, it's very humble, and it's more like an on-site package plant. They are located in Fresno County, and this project was referred to me by permitting office because Shady Lakes was having a difficult time complying with the current permit, and also was not going to be able to meet the nitrate control program requirements. So this is their aeration tank, settling tank, secondary ponds, evapotranspiration ponds. And so Shady Lakes is connecting to Malaga County water, wastewater district. And they are located less than a mile away from the community. And they meet all the requirements for Senate Bill 1215 and the funding criteria in terms of very small population, the number of connections, and of course, inadequate on-site sewage treatment system that is very aged and needs to be replaced, as you saw in the previous pictures. But one of the great things about this project that, by the way, is already within the funding process with DFA, the application was submitted and by Malaga County Water District. So one of the interesting things about this project and is that since Malaga County Water District is also providing sewer services to a small, severely disadvantaged community, they could apply for a separate grant funding as part or capital improvement grant funding for their wastewater treatment facility. So initially, these were going to be submitted as two separate projects, but now with recommendation from the Division of Financial Assistance, these two projects are being combined into one to increase, make better use of the resources on both sides, the sewer service provider and DFA in terms of review of application and all of that. So one engineering and feasibility study, one CEQA, and one application. So these are things that I look for to incentivize or motivate the sewer service provider when I am kind of doing the preliminary research before doing outreach to the sewer service providers. This is another example, and this is strictly wastewater consolidation, meaning the community of Palermo, located in Butte County. They have a population of about 3,000, and we are talking about 1,000 connections. And this project, the sewer service provider, which is Lake Oroville Public Utility District, is doing all the application process and everything. And this is very interesting because Lake Oroville Public Utility District, they discharge into the Sewer Commission of Oroville wastewater treatment plant. So they send their effluent for ultimate treatment to another wastewater treatment plant. So potentially the project is going to include extension of wastewater treatment capacity and construction to these two entities. So, and this is a little bit of a reality check, and these projects take a long time. And that's where I was trying to emphasize earlier. The advantage of having a technical assistance provider is tremendous because the application for this project was submitted by the sewer service provider on November of 2021, and they are expecting to have a funding. This is the planning application. They are expected to have a funding agreement for the planning application phase by maybe April, May, or June of this year. So that's a long time to wait for just for the planning application process. So this could be reduced substantially if they will have at the time a technical assistance provider. So, and this is our contact information. And thank you very much for allowing me to share this information with you. And I am looking forward to continue working with all of you and hopefully facilitate community connections to sewer services in the future. Thank you. And I will take any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Dania? You can either put them in the chat or raise your hand. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and then proceed. Next up is Laurel Wardrip. She is a program manager to the State Water Board Water Waste Discharge Requirements. Go ahead and take it from here, Laurel.
Thank you. Hopefully I share the right screen. Can you, okay, there's 2 steps with Zoom. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Hopefully we use Teams a lot, so forgive me. Okay, so we're gonna go through just some tips on using the California Integrated Water Quality System, or a loving acronym CWICS. And thank you for that introduction. I'm going to just say in general what waste discharge requirements are and what National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits are, or NPDS permits. We love our acronyms. And then I'll go a little bit over the CWICS public report page. And as Danya said, no database is perfect, but it is kind of the first place to look if you're looking for wastewater permitting information from the water boards. Some of the CWICS terminology that's used pretty universally in the system, some ways to search for information you're looking for, like places, owners, facilities, and then we'll go through some of the key areas relevant to wastewater consolidation. So kind of what to look for in a waste discharge requirement or NPDS permit, things like that. So just really quick, there's a lot of different waste discharge requirements. They go all the way to like dredge and fill permitting, landfill permitting, just there's a ton of catch-all under waste discharge requirements. What you'll find in this group in particular is we call it the non-15 or WDR program. It's when it's not designated as hazardous waste per chapter 15 of the California Code of Regulations and not subject to Title 23 or 27. So it has this exemption status. It often applies to domestic wastewater or food processing facilities. It's a good example of one, but one where it's a WDR but not exempt would be a landfill in most cases. Just wanted to. And then an NPDS permit is where there's a discharge potentially to waters of the United States. So it's a federal permitting program for wastewater and stormwater, where WDRs or waste discharge requirements primarily cover discharges to land. Okay. So the next thing is the CWICS homepage. And on this homepage, you will find a lot of information about CWICS. There's a lot of different reports that you can kind of poke and prod around. Here's the link to the program homepage, but we're going to be focusing mainly on the CWICS public reports today. So it's just kind of one of the subsets. And then another part of this is some resources. So CWICS, the program webpage, has information on who is regulated, a glossary of terms, and a frequently asked questions, which may be of use as you're navigating the system. Another thing that is a little harder to find, and it's used pretty universally in CWICS, are these subprogram titles, subprogram codes, and descriptions. And why this is important, and you'll see later in the slides, is there's kind of a categorization in CWICS for what permits or regulatory measures belong to what programs. And for example, NPDES-STW is not the same as NPDES-WW. So it's important, or it can be an indicator when you're looking through a bunch of different records of is it close to the program you're looking for or not. So ones we're going to focus on today are NPDS wastewater or waste discharge requirements that are under WDRs, and then I'll cover one for the sanitary sewer order as well. Okay, so the next thing, we're going to dive a little bit farther into that homepage for CWICS. like I said, there's a lot of different reports that are publicly available for CWIX, or the information in CWIX, and CWIX doesn't have everything for the WDR program, but it has a good start. And if you're looking for really complete information about annual monitoring reports, self-submitted annual reports, or other monitoring reports, you may not find all that information in CWIX, but you can see what's there and then either contact staff or look in other places for the resources. It is a little bit more built out for NPDES, but you may have to go search in other spots or contact the region to get a complete picture. We are working on it though. So today, like I said, there's a lot of reports. We're going to focus on the facility report, the sanitary sewer overflow report, one of those, and then the party at a glance report, which is under miscellaneous reports. So you might miss it. Okay. So when you click on the facility reports, there's two different main reports. The first one is the facility at a glance, this is where, if you kind of know what you're looking for when it comes to a facility's name, owner, operator, agency, this is a good place to start. The other report is the interactive regulated facilities report. This kind of gives you big broad categories. Like you can search by region, you can search by program, you can search by different metrics like that, like location, like county, instead of narrowing into the actual facility. So today we're going to use the facility at a glance report because we have some examples so we kind of know what we're looking for. Okay. So when you click on that facility at a glance link, this is what you'll see. It's a search, and less is more with database searches. So for our example today, we're going to use Malaga, and hopefully I say that right. And we're just going to put Malaga in the search, and it'll give us the most comprehensive set of records. Once you hit that search, then you'll get a list of records, and these are different places and the agency and kind of the forefront of what about the facility. Obviously, in this case, we're not looking for auto dismantlers, so we can kind of hone in onto something more related to wastewater consolidation or regionalization, which would be the wastewater treatment facility or the combined sewer here in these top two records. So when you click on one of the records, and we're going to start with the wastewater treatment facility, you get this new screen, and the next few slides are what you'll see. It's broken up into sections. You can print the report, you can download it to Excel, you can go back to your other search, look at the glossary. You can also download a PDF of it. So it has a lot of different things you can get the data out of the system at this point. And I think almost all the reports have that functionality. So it's pretty cool, and it does work. It works well. The other thing, you'll see that general information from your search repopulated. And then the first category will be the related parties. These are not the legally responsible officials per se. We'll go through where to find some of that information in a bit. Okay. The next thing that you'll see if you tile down into the screen after you select the facility is you'll see these regulatory measures. And this is where your handy acronym sheets come into play. At the end of the presentation, I have the cheat sheets for you guys since you're going to get the slides. So what you have here is a list of regulatory measures that apply to the wastewater treatment facility, because a lot of facilities have more than one permit or action related to them. The ones that are available in CWIX will have a blue link where you can potentially download an attachment related to that, like an order number or an order. And you have some really good information here about effective dates of requirements, or when things were sent, like a letter, when they expired, and then their status. So this is a really good example of, they had a lot of different permits over time. The NPDES permits became historical, and now they only have waste discharge requirements because they probably just discharge to land at this point, no discharge to surface water. And everything's been made historical. And you can see that the waste discharge requirement has, it has been reissued a few times. So you can see what the current one is. So there's active status for the most applicable requirements. There was also a letter that went out in 2011 that was related to probably rescinding the NPDES information. So if you want to know, so it is also helpful to know those acronyms for waste discharge requirements, or NPD being an NPDES action. And there's a second part of it here where it has this WDR Muni large, and that means it actually has a sizing to it with the acronym of it actually being over 0.1 million gallons per day as being large. There's a site cleanup active measure here, some historical ones for NPDES, and then one active NPDES wastewater letter. So it kind of helps you get a picture of the facility. Also SWRCB also has a lot of information internally that you can contact staff and get that information, and some of it is also in the public lens, but you can get the effective date of the requirements, the contacts, and then basically who's the most involved at the regional board in the project. Okay. So still on the facility at a glance report, you'll get into the violations next. So if you scroll down when you get the search, and it only shows the last 5 years, which it sounds from some of the other presenters that might be enough to kind of get an idea of the violations in the past 5 years. But if you want to look further, you can go to the main SWRCB violation report and do a similar search and find the facility to see if there's anything older. It also has some acronym definitions handy right there in the screen, and some information on how to use the report. And now we're going to go into the same search. You can see the actual enforcements and inspections, and where available, there'll be a blue link where you can actually access the record related to the entry here. If you want that record and it's not there, you could ask your regional board contacts to see if they have that information. So it gives you a good idea on when different enforcement actions took place, what kinds, what level, what level of severity, how active it is, or if it was a draft or it was superseded, those kinds of statuses. And then inspections, when was it last inspected, what kind of inspection it was, and if there's any information you can glean on compliance. So if you find cool information that you want, you might want to download it. So wherever you see in SWRCB, other than in the titles where it can sort for you, if you see a row that has blue, you can download it. You click on it, it'll open a pop-up, and then you click on the file link that you're interested in, and it will download your file. Some of the most relevant files, maybe for technical assistance providers in this context, other than drinking water and other things you do TA for, would be maybe the waste discharge requirements. This is where, as Danya mentioned, you can get facility capacity, any permit limitations, where it's located, some of the facility treatment technologies used, and how the wastewater flow moves through the facility, any other regulatory requirements, groundwater conditions. There's also actual waste characteristics in these waste discharge requirements, and there's a lot of standard provisions as well. And last but not least, the sampling and monitoring requirements. So this is a really good place to stop and see what actually applies to the facility and what the facility conditions are. The other thing you'll probably find is you might want to look at the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits. They look similar, but they're different. This is, federal permitting for discharges to waters of the United States, and it has potentially effluent limits, surface and groundwater limitations. You'll see that a lot of NPDES permits also are waste discharge requirements. So they have kind of conditions for both. Yeah, so very similar to the intent and purpose of the information in a in a waste discharge requirement, but it has some additional requirements in it that the facility has to comply with. So next we'll go to, so that was kind of going through the facility at a glance for the Malaga wastewater treatment facility. So if we go back to that original screen search, we're now going to go look at the community sewer. So the Malaga CWBCS. And when you click on that at the facility at a glance, what you'll find is it looks really similar at first to the wastewater treatment facility, but there are less regulatory measures tied to it. There's one active SSO Muni Small. So this is a small municipal collection system. And then there's some information about related parties. So what you have to do at this point, and you can see that the violations, enforcement actions, and inspections are 0 for this facility in this report. So you have to kind of know where information is stored in CWIC so that you don't come away with the impression that there's nothing related to this facility. It's just not in this report. So what do? We're going to go to a different report. So what you'd go do is go back to the CWIC's public report homepage and click on the interactive SSO report. And it'll open a very similar search to the facility at a glance. And as you start typing in a keyword, it'll find records that are associated with it. So it's really cool. So if you start typing Malaga, it'll pop up the associated options for that as it's put into CWICs. I still do the less is more with searches. So once you put in that, you generate the report and it'll give you a report of information on the sanitary sewer order compliance. It's kind of a separate module in CWICs. Things like the size of the system, the overflow conditions. It has a lot of stuff, and depending on the facility, there's even more information available. One thing you'll find, at least with this one, the order was not attached or downloadable from CWICs, but it is the general sanitary sewer order. This was just readopted, so this is the previous order. So the regional boards will be looking at or enrollment into this order, probably the new order pretty soon. But this would be the sanitary sewer order that applies to the actual collection system for the wastewater treatment facility. And it has similar provisions to the other WDR I showed, but this is a general waste discharge requirement. So one set of requirements kind of covers a lot of different facilities, and it has reporting requirements, monitoring, standard conditions, prohibitions, information in general about compliance. Okay. So the third report we'll talk about is how do you find the legally responsible officials? And this is under the Party at a Glance report. So you go back to the CWIC's main screen, you go to miscellaneous reports, and then click on Party at a Glance. And what you'll find when you put in the same search as you've been doing for these other reports, you'll actually find parties, but you'll actually see this role relationship associated at this point. You'll see start dates for the individuals, their relationship end dates, and kind of if there's any applicable classifications. So this can be a really helpful way to kind of zero in on who the legally responsible officials are. And I know Don, you had this slide, but if for wastewater consolidation, I know I mentioned a few times contact your regional board staff when you can't find records you need in CWICs. These are the wastewater consolidation regional board staff for the regions that had wastewater consolidation positions assigned. If it's not a wastewater consolidation, you can also go to the WDR program contacts at the state board page, and it has the seniors for WDRs listed there. And the MPDS program webpage has similar contacts as well. I wanted to also, since I think I have time, I wanted to show really quick, hopefully, if you can't, you can also kind of look at the regional board adopted order pages to see if there's information there as well to like look at the orders, or things adopted by that board related to the facility. This is the example of the Region 5 order page, which can be another helpful tool. That is all I had. I will stop sharing my screen.
All right. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. I thought I saw a question by Himali. Now I'm not seeing it in the chat. Did you still have a question, Himali?
Hi, Laurel. Are you able to show the previous slide where you had the contacts for the regional board for consolidation? I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry. I was saying they're going to send the slides out, so you'll have it. But here's the slide for the wastewater consolidation staff. I know that type is really small. And then if you go to the State Board Waste Discharge Requirement Program page, I can show you that link as well. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you.
And then this is the link you'll have in the slides if you want to talk to the Waste Discharge Requirement Program staff that are maybe not directly or only wastewater consolidation staff.
Great. Well, thank you, Laura. Is there any more questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Laura, Dana. That was you did a really nice job on your presentation, as did all of our presenters today. If everyone can just join me in giving a round of virtual applause to our presenters today. They did a wonderful job. I'm sure they would really appreciate that. Also, AB's going to drop a link in the chat to complete the training evaluation form. We would appreciate you completing the form and providing us with your input. And I just want to thank you for joining our presentation series. We do have a presentation coming up. It's called Point of Use. I believe we sent out the email invite on that one. If we haven't, please watch your emails for that. It should be sometime in February. But thank you all for joining, and oh, looks like we have some, oh, we got a bunch of thumbs up. Great. Well, thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Fantastic work, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.